Hey y'all, it's Elizabeth off grid. I wanted to talk about diabetes. So I live in a car and have type 2 diabetes. And yes, it is more difficult to manage type 2 diabetes in a car, which you might imagine. So I want to talk about how I'm managing type 2 diabetes while living in a vehicle. And some of this would apply no matter what kind of vehicle you live in, being on a road trip or living off grid or any kind of alternative setup for the structure of your life. So to give a little bit of background, as I said, I have type 2 diabetes. And for those of you who don't know, there's multiple different kinds of types of diabetes. I have the one where I still do make insulin, but my insulin just has troubles, is the very short version of that. So I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes last year. So less than a year ago is when I was officially diagnosed. But I had gestational diabetes when I was pregnant 18 plus years ago. And I also had pre-diabetes for, I don't know, more than a decade. So this has been something in my life that I was not surprised about. Also, my dad and my aunt, his sister, and my grandma, his mother, all had diabetes. So, it was very much on the radar. And when I was diagnosed with diabetes, I now realize I had a ton of symptoms that were from diabetes that I didn't even realize because they were this long, slow buildup of diabetes. So I had to pee all the time. I was hungry all the time. I was thirsty all the time. I had fatigue issues. I did not connect any of those with diabetes. I just thought that's just how I was because it was such a long, slow progression. It wasn't like something that happened suddenly, so I never brought it up with a doctor because I just thought that's who I am. I'm someone who constantly has to pee or is constantly hungry or is constantly thirsty and has fatigue all the time. Getting my blood sugar under control, wild difference in all those. Especially the hunger, thirst, and needing to pee all the time. I mean, actually even the fatigue, it was almost overnight, like within 48 hours of getting my blood sugar under control. Radical change to the quality of my life. And actually helps make this life that I have now so much more possible. So how do I manage that? Now, by the way, when I was diagnosed, my A1C was 7 and now it's 6.3. And it is amazing how the difference between 7 and 6.3 has been huge for me. 7 is not that high. It's actually almost what a lot of people are trying to do as their goal. But for me, going from 7 to 6.3, radical change. Now, I did that mostly when I was living in an apartment, but I'm still continuing that now. So I want to talk about the 5 things that I do to manage diabetes and how I do those while living in a car. Number 1, test. I think this is something that isn't talked about quite enough. It would be perfect. In a perfect world, we would all have a continuous monitoring system for our glucose. But that's really expensive, and it seems like they only really give that to people who are type 1, people who need insulin and things. So typically, it seems like what they're doing for people who are not on insulin is that they just give us a glucose monitor and have us test once a day. I don't think that is a good strategy to help you manage the diabetes because it just gives you kind of literally just once a day. It doesn't help you make better choices. And so that is what I do for my diabetes. Now, the test protocol actually was like someone wrote a blog post about it and then went around Reddit. So, I mean, this is something, I think I've learned about it on a Discord about diabetes, but this has been going around for years. And this is not something that comes from like an individual doctor. This is like from the diabetes community. The idea is that you get a whole bunch of test strips. I actually was able to get my doctor to just prescribe some more test strips for me. But then besides that, I had to just buy them off Amazon, and you test all the time. So how I did it was I first did a baseline where I didn't change anything about my life and then just exercise, food, nothing, and just tested morning, before I eat, after I eat, evening, all day long for multiple days to see how am I reacting at different times of day with my kind of normal way I eat. And then I can make adjustments to it scientifically and see, oh, does this change it? And that's how I figured out how to tweak what the doctors told me. So the doctors told me certain things to do. And so what I would do is I'd implement them in certain different ways and figure out how that works in my life. And the big thing and how that applies to living in a car is there's aspects of my life that are different and a change on a daily basis that I wouldn't know how that affects my blood sugar unless I'm literally testing my blood sugar, right? So when I go up at high elevation, my blood sugar is wacky. When I eat different kinds of food than I normally do, my blood sugar is wacky. When it's super hot. So these are all things I have to manage. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I specifically manage them. But I wouldn't know that they were an issue unless I was actually testing my blood sugar all the time. I think it'd be great if we were all on continuous glucose monitoring, but we're not because it's expensive. So, you know, getting a whole bunch of test strips, that's the way I handle it. So now let's go into number 2. This is a very straightforward thing, which is medication. I'm not on insulin. I don't need to be on insulin yet. I'm just on metformin extended release. If you're taking metformin, the non-extended release, and you have gastro problems, go back to your doctor and see if going on extended release would be good for you. Because for me, fixed all my gastro problems overnight. Wonderful quality of life improvement. So I don't have to take it with water, or food or anything. I mean, I just take a little sip of water, but I don't even take it with food, nothing. I also take a statin for cholesterol. I did not have high cholesterol, but they like to be very, very aggressive about cholesterol. So now I have like super low cholesterol because I take a statin. I had no side effects from it. So taking my medication every day, what I do is I literally have them right here and, you know, measured out in a thing. And then I keep usually 2 weeks of them with me. I have them in the little things, but they're not right now. And then I have some in here, which are like my backup. I actually keep most of my meds in my storage, which is climate controlled. So that way they will not kind of denature by being too hot in the car. And then this is just for the short amount of time that I'm going to take for the week or two if I'm traveling or whatever. In a perfect world, I'd be able to keep these in a more climate controlled situation and then in a car, but that's just what I got, you know, I'm in a car. So we'll see if that actually matters, but so far it's doing fine. Number 3 is managing stress. Now, stress, like, well, that always, they talk to me about stress and they're like, oh, do you have stress? And I just laugh because I'm like, of course I have stress. What kind of a ridiculous question is that? The thing is, this isn't just about emotional stress and mental stress. Obviously, those are important things to manage using whatever systems are appropriate for you. It can be going to therapy, it can be doing meditation, it can be doing yoga, it can be exercise, being outside. Actually, me just being outside all the time really helps me manage my stress. It can be cognitive behavior therapy, it can be writing in a journal, it can be doing hobbies like knitting. Whatever works for you to help you manage your stress, obviously that's important. But there's another kind of stress that I think isn't talked about enough that very much applies if you live in a car, which is environmental stress. So when you're in a car, you are so much more subject to environmental stresses. So that's hot, heat, cold, pollution, humidity issues, as well as altitude if you're going up into the mountains, if you're just changing from one place to another. These kinds of environmental conditions, you're kind of insulated from a bit if you live in a house or an apartment, assuming you have, you know, central heat and air conditioning and an air filter and all that stuff. But in a car, you don't have that unless you're like in a Tesla or something that has all the same filters. But for most people, they don't have that. And so by testing my blood sugar, I can see how those affect me. And I've had to adjust what I was eating and drinking when I was, for example, at high altitude or when it's really hot, etc., because those environmental factors radically affect my blood sugar. And so it is important for me, anytime I'm exposed to really radical environmental factors, that I stay on top of my blood sugar in a way that even if I'm eating the same food and doing the same exercise, whatever, I still have to monitor it differently as if I was doing something else different. So that's number 3. So let's go into number 4, which is exercise. Now, interestingly enough, living in a car, I actually find it easier because I go to Planet Fitness every day when I'm in town to shower, and so I work out while I'm there. I mean, that's fairly straightforward. And then when I'm traveling, a lot of times I'm walking and hiking and stuff. Like, that's kind of the point of traveling for me. So because of that, I've actually found it a lot easier to integrate exercise in my life living in a car, which is kind of funny or ironic or something like that. When I was still in an apartment, I would go on a walk every day for 30 minutes. Now it's fairly integrated into my life and I don't have to make myself do it, which is nice. Number 5, which is I think the biggest thing in a lot of ways, is food. So it is more difficult to eat a specific diabetes type diet living in a car. And that's because I don't have a refrigerator or freezer. Now, I actually could have a refrigerator or freezer. I actually own a fridge that can be a refrigerator or freezer. I tried having a cooler with ice, and that just annoyed me too much. But I eventually may try again to have my refrigerator. But I'm not doing that right now because I just can't dealing with all the electricalness of that. So I'm keeping my life very simple by eating shelf-stable food. So what I do, and this is how it came from my doctor. My doctor's recommendation that was given to me as a prescription, I guess, is to have 30 to 45 grams of carbs for each meal. And pay attention to protein a lot more than I normally would have paid attention to protein. And then I can have, as my snack is like 15 grams of carbs. Depending upon other factors, if I'm going to exercise extra, I may eat more carbs, etc. So I do count carbs. And I do also pay attention to protein and fat as the way to fill me out. So what I do is I eat mostly shelf-stable food, except for either going out to eat. Like I just went to Whole Foods salad bar, hot bar, and got food there. Or I buy something and then go eat it or cook it right then, so I can go buy lunch meat and make a sandwich right then, since I don't have a way to store it. I actually, while it is definitely harder to do that in a car on a budget, don't get me wrong, it's definitely harder, because you can't, like, all those foods that are great for getting a lot of healthy calories while keeping things low carb, I really can't keep in a car when I don't have refrigeration or a cooler or anything like that. But what I do is I buy vegetables every other day. And I have a soft cooler to kind of keep them, safe, because vegetables will keep well for a day or two, So I buy vegetables, and then I have at least one meal, like hot meal with vegetables in it. And then I have a salad every single day, pretty much. And those, I get a lot of vegetables in there, which is very good for me. I'm not really a big fruit person, so I don't really even worry about eating fruit. However, I do have applesauce on hand, so if I ever have a low blood sugar issue, I can eat applesauce that's 15 grams of really lovely, yummy carbs that I can eat even if I don't feel good, and my blood sugar is fine in case I have a low blood sugar. Typically for me, it's due to either not feeling well, or it's due to like doing some really, really big hike and forgetting that I need to eat extra. Then I look at putting together breakfast, putting together second breakfast, putting together lunch, putting together dinner. I eat 4 meals a day, 4 small meals a day, instead of eating 3 meals and a snack, because eating every 4 hours actually keeps my blood sugar more even. Now I change when I eat the hot meals and things like that, depending upon the day, what I'm doing, and how hot it is. So today, lately, it has been very warm. It's been in the 90s. So I've actually been eating what you might think of as lunch or dinner as second breakfast. So I eat breakfast very early at like 6 in the morning. And then around 10, 11, somewhere around there, I have second breakfast or early lunch. And that right now is my hot meal. But historically, when it's not really hot, I might have that be a snack. And also if I'm traveling, if I'm driving, etc., that may be a snack. And then I'll have my hot meal later in the day. But that's one of the ways I keep my blood sugar even, is by making sure that I eat every 4 hours, even though my schedule changes from day to day, because I wake up, I don't set an alarm. I wake up when I wake up, which is usually early. It's usually between 4:30 and 5:30 in the morning. Sometimes it's 6. But when I'm traveling, I do things in a different order and a little bit different schedule. But making sure that I eat around every 4 hours is one of the ways I keep my blood sugar even. And then anytime I change the food that I'm eating, that's when I test. That's when I measure my blood sugar to see, okay, I ate that new thing. I went to that restaurant. I tried some new food. How did that affect my blood sugar? And the thing is, it's not very obvious what is going to make you have a spike. For example, I can eat ice cream, and actually the more fat that's in the ice cream, the less it affects my blood sugar, because the fat kind of evens out how I metabolize the carbs. So I actually better off eating the most high fat, like frozen custard, and I can eat almost as much as I want. I'll just become satiated very, very quickly. I don't need to eat that much because it has so much fat in it. It does not affect my blood sugar at all. But if I was going to eat, a cake or something, that would spike my blood sugar. Even if it's the same, it could be half the amount of carbs, but because it has less fat, like low fat is terrible for me. So I'm not telling you that's how you should eat at all. What I'm saying is that because I test, I know how I should eat. And if you're not testing, how are you possibly going to know? Some generic diet, that's a good place to start and is helpful if you don't have a way to test or you can't test or whatever. But that is not going to tailor it for your specific body. And that's what I found is the most important thing for me, is to tailor how I eat, how I exercise, how I handle everything for what my blood sugar actually is. That's a scientific way to approach this. If we're just like going off some generic diet, some generic system, that's helpful if you don't have the energy to do anything else. But that is not a way to have the most efficient management of blood glucose. The most efficient management is to know exactly how things affect you. And if you get to the point where you need insulin, you're gonna have to do that anyway. So I think it's a really good tool. It's a really good skill to learn now to prepare you for the point of you needing insulin, and then also maybe putting it off as long as possible, and maybe you'll never actually need insulin. Now the thing is, for me, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes at age 48, I guess was my official diagnosis. So I probably, unless they radically do some amazing, genetic recombination kind of a thing with diabetes, I will probably eventually need insulin by the time I get, when it gets, 30 years from now. But the longer I can put it off, the better, because insulin is expensive and a big giant hassle, right? So it's not bad. It's not a failure to need insulin at all. However, it is a hassle, and you don't want to have to do it if you don't need to. So as of right now, I am finding it very possible to live in a car and manage type 2 diabetes. It would be much harder if I had to have insulin, just because I'd have to manage the insulin staying climate controlled. And so I'd have to have a cooler with ice that I have really on top of, or I have to have a refrigerator to manage the insulin and keep it safe. And then also manage those prescriptions. The nice thing about the pills that I take is I get a prescription every 90 days. So that's easy to factor in to when I travel. But if I was getting insulin, I don't know if they do that. I'm thinking that they do it only once a month, and then it would be much harder for me to manage. I actually don't know. Maybe they do sometimes do insulin on a 90-day basis. That would make things a lot easier. So again, this is Elizabeth Off Grid. I really think that most things are possible. I'm not going to say everything, but most things are possible to manage if you live in a car, if you live in a van, if you live in an RV, if you live off grid. It just takes a lot of planning and consideration and puzzling out what works for you. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye-bye.